Has science disproved Christianity? Does the study of our universe point towards or away from God? And why do high-profile critics of Christianity say that you have to choose between God and science? If you've ever asked those questions, then check this out. One of the most common reasons cited for rejecting Christianity is the belief that God and science are locked in a perpetual war as two competing explanations for our universe, with faith and religion in God's corner while fact and reason are on team science. And with high-profile scientists moonlighting as vocal critics of religion, you could easily form the impression that modern science has progressively chased away the superstitious shadows of religious belief. After all, didn't the ancients used to invoke the gods to explain all manner of natural phenomena that they just didn't understand? Lightning, well, that was Zeus from Mount Olympus, and thunder, well, that was Thor, or Chris Hemsworth striking his hammer. And yet the rise of modern science has meant that these gaps in our knowledge of the natural world, the ones religious people used to plug God into, are quickly disappearing, such that soon there will be no room for God at all. And so Neil deGrasse Tyson summarizes the belief of skeptical scientists, that God is an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance. So what does the Christian story have to do with the study of nature? Has science disproved Christianity? The simple truth is this conflict hypothesis that God and science are at war is a myth long abandoned by historians of science, even though it gets propagated today by well-meaning but misinformed thinkers. This conflict myth traces back to two 19th century figures, John William Draper and Andrew Dixon White, who intentionally recast the relationship between science and religion in a negative light and crafted the conflict narrative to suit their own agenda. As it turns out, the truth is far more interesting. For starters, let's begin with a simple observation, since that's a huge part of the scientific method. If God and science were at war, as they say, then you would expect to find a certain demographic of casualties strewn across the intellectual battlefields, namely scientists who believe in God. For if science had buried God, then any scientist worth their salt would surely give up on their religious beliefs, right? The only problem? Well, the facts suggest otherwise. A great many high-profile scientists are also believers in God. Francis Collins was the director of the Human Genome Project and headed up the National Institute for Health in the USA. Jennifer Wiseman serves as the senior project scientist for NASA's Hubble Space Telescope, and Gerhard Ertl was a Nobel Prize-winning chemist. And in case you're just worried that I'm cherry-picking a few notable examples, a survey of Nobel Prize winners across the 20th century reveals that more than 85% self-identified as either Christian or religiously Jewish, outing themselves as believers in God. So from this simple observation, we can draw a simple conclusion, that if science had disproved God, then someone forgot to tell an awfully large number of prize-winning scientists. Looking back further in history, the scientific revolution didn't take place in a vacuum. Rather, it seems that the Christian story actually set the stage for the rise of modern science. In pondering why science exploded in a Christianized Europe as opposed to Africa or Asia centuries before, historians of science have landed on a consensus that the Judeo-Christian story provided the intellectual soil and motivational fertilizer out of which the scientific method could grow. You see, the Christian story teaches that A, our universe is rationally ordered by an intelligent mind so that the forces of nature, they follow static laws, rather than just being ever-changing with the whim of fickle and capricious deities. That B, humanity is made in God's image, with rational minds of our own that have the capacity to unlock the secrets God has woven into the fabric of creation. That C, God gave humanity in Genesis the cultural mandate to study creation in order to make it fruitful and harness its potential. And that D, humanity were damaged by evil, meaning as fallen creatures we could either fudge our results or misinterpret the data, requiring a system of external and repeatable measurement and peer review that could guard against our darker demons and promote truth-seeking. Which is why when you survey the fathers of modern scientific fields, Newton, Kepler, Faraday, Pascal, all of them were believers in God, Jesus, and the Christian story. And far from seeing their Christian faith as a hindrance to their endeavors, they genuinely believed that God inspired their science. Johann Kepler remarked in his study of mechanics that he was thinking God's thoughts after him. And Isaac Newton argued in his Principia Mathematica that these discoveries were intended to help people step from perceiving rational order in the universe to believing in an intelligent creator. And so C.S. Lewis sums up in a single sentence what historians and philosophers of science justify in scholarly tomes. That men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. And beyond how belief in the Christian story actually opened the door to the scientific revolution, many of the subsequent discoveries of science, far from pointing away from God, make more sense in light of God's existence. Take, for example, the discovery that our universe, space, time, matter, and energy, does not stretch infinitely back into the past, but that it had an absolute beginning at some finite point. This discovery has strengthened the key premise in one of the most famous philosophical arguments for God's existence, the Kalam cosmological argument. Or take the discovery of the highly improbable calibration of the initial conditions of our universe to allow for intelligent life. This scientific data has led to the development of a teleological line of reasoning known as the fine-tuning argument, which when combined with discoveries like the surprising way abstract mathematics maps onto the physical world, or the way that biological organisms are comprised of coded information systems, it seems our universe bears the unmistakable appearance of design. This ordered structure in our cosmos is what recently prompted Ard Louis, professor of theoretical physics at Oxford University, to observe in conversation with Morgan Freeman, I think the more we learn about the world, it points more towards God rather than less. So far from burying God, if anything, it seems like science is resurrecting a rational belief in God. Now, while science can unearth a great deal about the history of our universe, when it comes down to it, disproving God is simply not in its purview. For as much as the tools of science are a tremendous gift to the tool belt of human knowledge, not every question has a scientific answer. Science has limits. Being bound to observe purely the physical universe, science has no access to the metaphysical. It cannot ultimately adjudicate on whether God does or does not exist. It cannot move from describing what is to pontificating about what ought to be. It cannot repeat the past to prove what did or didn't happen in history. So as soon as we step into questions of metaphysics, ethics, or even human history, we simply move beyond the authority of the sciences to speak. Ultimately, where many people who pose the science objection get tripped up is by confusing two different types of explanations. Suppose I was to ask you, why are you watching this video? And you answered, well, the pixels on the screen are emitting light, which then passes through the lenses in my eye. There the images and arrangement of letters are translated into electrochemical signals, which, along with the sound emitted and picked up by the reverberations in my eardrums, are then interpreted in my brain via centers for language and memory, forming them into coherent thoughts that convey meaning to my conscious mind. Now, I might be impressed at your wit to such a response, but you haven't really answered my question. You gave me a mechanistic explanation using science. You explained how you are watching. But what I was really asking for was a personal explanation, or an explanation of agency, the why. To which the answer might be something like, because I'm searching for answers to life's deepest questions. See, the how and the why, the mechanism and the agency, they're not competing explanations, they are perfectly complementary. Because as much as we can learn about how you take in videos from science, we can learn nothing about why you're watching them from that same enterprise. For that, you would have to speak. And the same is true when it comes to science and God. Science can tell us a great deal about how the universe operates, but it cannot tell us why it exists. For that, God has to speak. And when it comes to God and the Christian story where he speaks, I know of no serious scientific reason to disbelieve anything Jesus has said about who you are, why you are here, and where you are going. If anything, science should only give us some more good reasons to tune into him more carefully. G'day, it's Dan here from Questioning Christianity. We are all about helping you connect the Christian story to life's deepest questions. So if you're enjoying the content, why don't you subscribe and click the bell on YouTube that you can go ahead and follow us on socials.